Hello everyone, my name is Justice, and if you're new to my channel, I am going to be going over a case, and then I'm going to be going over the forensic psychology behind the case. I am nearly done my dissertation with my PhD program in forensic psychology, and my hopes is to go into consulting. So I've been going over cases, and then I've been kind of giving the different perspective of the crime and the criminal and the victimology and the criminology and all of the ologies. So let's get into it. We'll pretend that there's like a cool music theme right here. Okay, so we're going to go over today the case of the Atlanta child killer, which took place in 1979 to 1981. So what had happened was a lot of African American children were going missing. Their bodies were then found in wooded areas. They were found near the Chattahoochee River. And they were shot, they were asphyxiated, they were strangled. There was different kind of killings, but they were all suspected to be the same person. So at this time, you have to remember this is 1979, so there's a lot of racial tension. The KKK is still in full mode. Racism is still extremely apparent, especially being in the Deep South in Atlanta, Georgia. So take that into consideration as I'm going into this case. And I do just want to stop and say, like, even if you have theories, even if your theory agrees with mine, I want you to wipe it all and pretend that you haven't heard this case before, because I want my listeners to kind of go into a different perspective of this. And I think going into a different perspective is really hard when you already have it in your mind that one person is or isn't the killer. So I do just want to say that. But going forward, so basically the FBI got involved. They had a 100-person task force in Atlanta to find this child killer because I think at this point it was like 28 kids had gone missing and their bodies were found. And they ranged from 10 or 11 all the way up to 17. So they had the FBI on the case. They had a 100-person task force on the case. They brought in profilers, and profiling was very, very new at this point. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So at this point, the police believe that because there's so much information regarding the serial killer that the media is covering it nonstop. They imposed curfews. They started the phrase, "It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are at?" They would even have like security guards like walk kids to school. It was massive, and it was kind of nice to hear that it was so massive, especially being African American children, because a lot of times they do kind of go unheard of. So it was really it was different perspective to actually look back at history in 1979 and see that these children are going missing. And that was also in part because the parents and the community members of those that went missing made such an uprising of it. So they brought in the FBI, and the FBI was noticing that obviously all of the victims were young African-American children. So they said, well, how can someone sneak into these neighborhoods without being caught? So they immediately assumed that it was going to be an African-American person because they would blend in. They might be in there to get drugs, or they might be someone a part of the community, but they definitely thought it was someone who's African-American. So they thought that because there was so much media on this case that they would that the killer would start to dump bodies near the river again. Because most people believe that when you dump a body in the water, that it won't be found, and then the missing body, and you can't really get charged on a missing body, and so you kind of have that whole like theory as well. So one night, the police are stationed near Chattahoochee River. I forget the name of the bridge. I'm very sorry, but so they're there. They have officers at every bridge, and they hear a big sploosh in the water. And so after they hear the sploosh, they kind of like look at each other. They're looking down like, oh my God, did we actually, like, did this theory work? Like, did someone actually just get dumped into the river? And then as soon as they heard it, off came a car. And so they stopped the car, and they stopped this person named Wayne Williams. So Wayne was kind of asked questions what he was doing, and he said he was scouting a house that he was going to in the morning for a job not a job interview, but to interview someone for like a musical gig, because he was a journalist and he was into music, and he had like all of these things that he was interested in. So he was going to go look at the house at 3 o'clock in the morning to see if, to make sure he knew where he was going at 8 o'clock in the morning and whatever. So he gave the police this name of Cheryl, I forget the last name, and I didn't put that in my notes. So her name was Cheryl, and this was the address, this was the phone. Well, all three things were fake. There was no person named Cheryl, whatever the last name was. There was no address by that address, and the phone number was a fake. So immediately the police are like, holy shit, did we get the killer? Like, did this plan work? So then they start to investigate him more and more. So they take him into custody and they're questioning him. And then they find on one of the bodies that there was a body that was found in the river because they looked for it immediately. They did find an older person. He was 27 years old, and they did find like dog hair on him, and they found like rug like fibers on him, and both of them matched the dog that Wayne Williams had and the rug that he had in his car, I believe it was. So now the police are like, we got him. So this is where it like kind of gets hairy, is because he definitely killed the person that they found and had the evidence on, which was like the 27-year-old, right? So then they found like another kid they found one of the bodies of the children had the same hair and the same carpeting. So now they're like, yep, he matched that one kid. Let's do it. Case closed. Finito. He's black. He could fit in the, he's a little weirdo. So he fit the profile. And so they arrested him and they charged him. So they charged him with 2 adult murders that were found. And then they tied him to one of the child killers. Didn't charge him for it, but just tied him to it. And then they basically said, this is the child killer, because the killings had stopped at that point. And then he went to jail. There was an eyewitness testimony saying that they saw Williams jump out from behind an alley and was like kind of creepy to the kids. And so the kids thought that, or like the little kid that ended up to be an adult that testified and like came forward with a story saying that, he ran because he was so afraid, because he knew that Williams was the killer. He knew instantly when he saw him, and that's fine. And I'm not taking anything away from the survivor. I do not want to do that. I think we should believe all survivors. But the issue with that, is that the memory is extremely bad. And we tend to remember things that our brain like fills in different things, basically. So yes, he could have definitely seen Wayne Williams and maybe he was there, but unfortunately, eyewitness testimony is actually known to be extremely like unreliable, because you think you remember exactly what someone looks like. You'll say you'll never forget that person as long as you live, and then it turns out to not be that person because they were like in a different country at the time or whatever. So I always tend to take with, I saw them, I'll never forget that face, with a grain of salt. Now that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen and that your memory can remember, and there's that trauma that is involved, and I'm not taking that away. But I just tend to not use that as my like solidifying evidence, if that makes sense. So going forward, the killings have stopped. He's in jail. Everyone thinks that he did it, and he is put away. Even though he was not connected to any of the other child killings, he was only connected to like the 22-year-old and the 27-year-old that was killed, which I do think he killed, and I'm not taking that away. He's a murderer. That's not deniable. So here, so now I'm going to, that's kind of the case. I'm going to switch over to the forensic psychology. Now, obviously, the thing that's glaring in my face is that this is a child serial killer. Now, the thing that's also glaring me in the face is that there's different motives to the child serial killer. So let's go into why I keep saying child serial killer, like that's a big thing, because it is. So most of the time, serial killers go for adults. They go for someone that resembles them, resembles a family member, resembles a lover they can't get over. They're just opportunity or anything like that. But most of the time, they'll go for like older people. Child serial killers is actually kind of really rare. And that is because a lot of times when there's a child serial killer, they're looking to make a statement, as well as they're looking to damage the community. They're trying to break the community. If there was sexual assault involved with these children, then that would be kind of a different story. Not a big difference, but a little bit of a difference. So you have the different motives as well. So you have these victims that are meant to stir up the community. They're meant to make a statement. They're meant to bring grief. They're meant to bring hostility in the community. That's normally what someone who kills serially with children, that's what they're looking to do. So you have someone that's looking to do that, and then you have the different types of motives. Now, MOs. So some were shot, some were strangled, some were asphyxiated. And yes, those are two different things. Some were believed to be drowned in the river. Some bodies, I think there was a couple that haven't even been found as of now. I could be wrong. That's I believe that's what I read. So there's not a lot of consistency. So when you look at people that shoot children, normally they're extremely messed up in the head, but they're also looking for a quick kill and they're looking to make a statement. Then you have strangulation, which is normally a sign of extreme anger and aggression. They know their victims, meaning that they've either stalked them or they know them personally, or there's a vendetta against the person. Normally in strangulation, there's possessive controlness and there's a revenge or vendetta against them. So then you also have those that are drowned, which normally is, when it comes to the male offenders, just like a quick thing. Female offenders is a little bit different, but this was a profile as a male killer. So we're going to just knock out the female aspect of it. So then you take into consideration that this is 1979. These are African-American children. And as I just said, you're looking for an uprising in community. All of these children were unfortunately in lower socioeconomic classes. So you have someone that also believes that they're probably not going to get a lot of police attention because, do I have to say it? And it breaks my heart, but do I have to say it? So you get what I'm trying to say. Now, Wayne Williams was caught, killing stopped, he was charged. But here's the thing. Wayne didn't have anything against these kids. Could he have been a child molester? Sure, but you would have found sexual assault at the crime scene. So what also strikes me interesting with this case is that during Wayne Williams' trial, the prosecution had held back that there was a secret task force that was investigating the KKK because they had the same thoughts that I had, which was child serial killers are looking to make a statement in the community. Williams had nothing to state. He didn't sexually assault them, so why kill them? What is his motive? Is he just a psychopath? No. That is part of the reason I don't think he did it, and we'll also get to more information on that later. So now it came out that there was the investigation of the KKK that was not released by the prosecution after his trial. And so then they tried to do a retrial because that's withholding a lot of information that's actually against the Constitution, which means the trial was not going to be considered constitutional because they withheld important information such as other suspects and other leads that they had. And not only was there the investigation of the KKK, now if nothing absolutely turned up, they still should have mentioned it, but something did turn up. And this is where it gets me a little... So there was these brothers, last name was Sanders. One of them was extremely high up, and I don't remember I think it might have been Barry. I could be wrong on that. Please don't come at me. I didn't write down the names and you think I would have. So you have the one that's really, really high up, and then you have one that's a couple stages below them. And I totally spaced on his name. But the one I'm really focused on is Charles Sanders, which was kind of the low man on the totem pole in the KKK. Now, the KKK kind of works like a normal organizational group. You have your low man on the totem pole, and then you kind of work your way up with reputation, and then you kind of become the head, and you hold the meetings and whatever. So Charles was really kind of low on the list. Now, he was a creepazoid, to say the least. Not only was he in the KKK, but guess what kind of dog he had? I'll give you a hint. It was the same type of dog that was found on the child, that the evidence was then tied to Wayne Williams because they had similar dogs. So Charles Sanders also had a rug that was the same type of rug. And I might have inverted these, and if I did, I'm sorry. One of them had the rug in their car. The other had the rug in the living room. So now my brain is connecting dots, okay? Because you have a KKK brother of a head that's trying to work his way up. I'm sure there's a little bit of jealousy because one was high up and the other wasn't. So was he ordered to do it, or did he do it to gain the ranks? That I'm still questioning. I think either one is plausible. It's a 50-50. But you have someone that wants to work their way up to ranks, or they were told to do it. It would separate the African-American community. It would also be kind of a big thing for the KKK, getting rid of the black kids and, getting the African American community all uptight and really releasing anger and frustration and all of these things that would profile as a child serial killer. And not to mention, you have, I can't even put this into words. So you have Charles. He has the same rug as Williams. He has the same type of dog. I think one was like a husky, the other was a Alaskan Malamute, which are very, very, very similar. So then you have that. And also what I want to maybe mention is, now, how would Charles know when to stop the killing? How did he know all the information to the case to be able to pull it off and always be one step ahead of the police? And how would he have the ability to do all this? I think someone in the police station knew, whether they went to meetings and they just knew about it and kind of separated, kind of associated themselves, when they're at work, they're a police officer. When they're in the KKK, they're in the KKK. And so they just kind of maybe dropped hints to Charles, or what I think my personal theory is that someone on the police force knew Charles and knew the KKK and was a part of the plan and would feed them information so that when Williams was arrested, the officer was able to pin evidence on them, was able to get everything together, and was able to keep the KKK in the loop so that they knew when to stop killing. They knew where the police were looking. They knew when they'd be looking. They had all the inside of the information. Because funny enough, all of these kids, none of them had really any evidence on them. And so it would take someone who was pretty well endowed with crime in order to get away with that. Now, Wayne Williams, he wasn't that much of a troublemaker as a kid. He wasn't like this was his first rodeo. Again, do I think he killed 2 people? Yup. Does he belong in jail? Yup. Do I think he killed any of the kids? Nope. Because it's also very, very rare for someone who kills adults to kill children. Normally in victimology, they stay normally within the same-ish profile. But one of the major jumps that normally isn't crossed is age. So normally if you have someone that's killing mid-30s, you're not going to associate them with someone in their 70s. Or if you have someone that's killing, older people in their 70s and you find a 20-year-old, are they likely the same person? Probably not. Very different. So now you'd think 27 versus 17 is a really big difference. Well, there kind of is, especially because of how we regard children in our society. So if you ask me, I believe that I think that the FBI did the best that they could, especially because profiling was very new. And I think John Douglas was an amazing person, and I definitely look up to him. But I do think that now that we know a little bit more information about these types of cases and more of these profiles, that I don't think Wayne killed them. I do think that the psychology supports someone who has anger and aggression towards these victims, who is willing to rip apart a community, who knew and wanted these victims dead, wanted to feel them die. But Wayne didn't have any reason for that. And like I said, if there was sexual assault, then maybe you can make a case for that, but none of these bodies were reported for sexual assault. So in conclusion, I don't think that Wayne Williams did it just because of the psychology behind it. There wasn't a ton of evidence against him either. There was the evidence against the 2 older people, which again, I think he killed them. That's not, I think he dumped the body in the river. That's totally not up for debate. But what is up for debate is I think that the police knew who it was. They pinned it on Williams because he was black, and what would be more like the circle of life than being a racist, pinning black child deaths on a black person. And I think that someone in the police force either planted evidence, or I think that they kind of led the direction they wanted to go. So that's just kind of my thoughts on the case. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them below. I will go ahead and answer them. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.